first bought and played 3DO Doom in the summer of the year 2000. This would have been a second-hand copy from a car boot sale played on my FZ10 3DO, not the one I'm using here, that I bought after my first PlayStation in Christmas 1995 and my copy of Doom for it. Having prioritised the PlayStation over 3DO, teenage me had enough of a struggle to afford the £300 PlayStation. I was completely unaware of the now infamous development issues of 3DO Doom, that a single programmer was tasked with the port, in the credits here as Bill Heineman, which will be important in a bit, or even how the game looked and played, as I'd never bought any 3DO magazines to see a review, again prioritising the PlayStation. When I first loaded up the disc, I saw what appeared to be the dull brown menus of the Atari Jaguar version that I had seen before, but having already played both the PlayStation 1 and DOS PC versions of Doom regularly for the past 4 years, yeah, that's right, I didn't have Doom on PC in 1993, as mine was a 286 IBM that could barely run Wolfenstein. I didn't have high expectations, and buying the game in the first place was mainly down to simple curiosity. The first thing that struck me about it wasn't the fixed screen border, as even the original PC Doom version 1.66 defaulted to a smaller screen, but it was the awesome instrumental music that was akin to the PC version that neither the PlayStation 1 nor Jaguar had, bar the atmospheric soundtrack of the former. I straight away thought I'd missed out on an amazing version of Doom, so I got to playing. The next thing I noticed was the chuggy frame rate as I moved around E1, M1. I also tried to adjust the screen size to display bigger, but it wouldn't. As I said, I bought this out of curiosity to see what it was like, was impressed by the music, then disheartened by everything else, and subsequently never played it again for at least a decade. By that time, YouTube became prominent. I found out on a retrospective review of 3DO Doom that only one person had to code the port in the space of 10 weeks, which seemed unbelievable to me since I had also been learning Pascal to program games in the late 90s. So I researched further to find out about the development debacle and the said programmer, Rebecca Heineman. To confirm that, I dusted off and fired up 3DO Doom again, and lo and behold, yes, only one person is credited. But it was Bill Heineman. Nope, I didn't put two and two together, just thought it was a mistake. That was until around late 2015, when I was watching a live stream with a burger Becky, and was reminded of the previous knowledge I'd forgotten about the development, and that it actually was done by a female programmer. Nope, I still couldn't tell, even watching the live stream. Becky, for what I could tell, was of a female appearance. That was until she actually mentioned in a Q&A bit at the end, where she said she was a transsexual. Now I'm a Gen X, but my daughter calls me a boomer, plus I'm quite introverted and independently academic, so the concept of undergoing such surgeries or transitions was somewhat alien to me, but somehow fascinating. I have to state here I did not hold any emotion of hate, repulsion, or phobia as the modern day so-called woke would label me. On the contrary, I looked to find out a bit more, and this completely overtook my interest in the Art Data interactive development story. Since Becky had remained online, I had commented in the chat that I never knew she was a transsexual and that she was convincingly female in appearance, framing it as a compliment. I didn't mention that I was confused before by the Bill Heineman on the 3DO Doom slide screen, as I'd facepalmed myself a few moments before during the stream as having a duh moment about not figuring it out sooner. Rebecca did respond in what was to me an odd way, let's call it. I got the slight impression of offence, but she said that it was because I'd never met a trans person before, to which, and none of this is verbatim, how would I know unless their augmentations weren't particularly convincing and that they looked more like transvestites that were more of what I was aware of in the 1980s and 90s about the subject. We somehow get to me finding out that she has had the full surgeries to become completely female. However, there was still this air of offence, despite my intentions being just to learn more, where in any topic you can risk offending simply by not knowing and asking. So I thought to end the conversation with how interesting the story about the game was, and thanks. As the 3DO Doom development story, along with clips and references to that particular livestream spread, physical copies of 3DO Doom became increasingly valuable, at least compared to what I'd paid for mine. So I was delighted to sell it for 50 times what I paid. And Rebecca Heineman's story and appearances online remained popular for some time. I watched a couple of them, where I'd first found out she had married another male to female transsexual programmer, Janelle Jackies, formerly Paul Jackies, and understandably was quite involved with pushing the modern-day transsexual agenda-driven movement, with a following of not only those who shared her psychological and physiological experience, but the so-called woke crowd, a devolution of the social justice warriors a decade or so prior. That slight air of offence I noticed in Heineman's language before had also appreciated 50-fold, like my copy of 3DO Doom. I say agenda-driven, as like most cultural neo-Marxists, the LGBT movement is not about education, awareness, acceptance, rational debate, or even discord, but one that thrives on a victimhood mentality, offence, and psychological projection, something that became increasingly apparent on social media over the coming years with the vilification of those who questioned their rhetoric. Rebecca and her following openly called people who showed any dissent towards their agenda Nazis, undermining their argument of it being evil to offend, and given the parallels to their movement's tactics of protest and the Sturmabteilung of 1930s Germany is arguably projection. During the bullshit pandemic of 2020 and an appearance at a vintage computer expo towards the end of it, Rebecca and her significant other were also keen to push another narrative that I believe I'm still not allowed to mention on YouTube, but it involved taking particular measures and interventions against the issue we were supposedly facing in 2020, then continuing to do so biannually or each season thereafter. Consequently, Rebecca's SO Janelle sadly passed away in early 2024, having developed the illness Guillain-Barré syndrome, a known but unpublicised adverse effect of the intervention I can't directly name without censorship. A year later, Rebecca herself develops a sudden and fast cancer, another ominous link, that she sadly succumbed to a couple of weeks ago. With this sad news, the 3DO Doom story is yet again generating interest, and many people previously involved with it, talking of their time and experiences with Rebecca, and of course offering their condolences. I too, with an even bigger interest in 3DO Doom since my nostalgia and retro game collecting went into overdrive, watched all of the new YouTube videos on the subject, one of which was from a channel Stop Skeletons from Fighting. In this video, the host tells us of supposedly new findings about 3DO Doom, but I believe this was a bait and switch, as it only really mentions part of a costume used in the failed FMV sequences that Art Data Interactive attempted to create for the inclusion in the game. In the unlikely event you're watching this video and don't know the development story, it's a must-see, or hear. Anyway, this head of an improvised demon costume is auctioned, displayed somewhere, and that's the news. Then the next segment is about a short promotional video for 3DO Doom, which isn't really a new thing as it's been viewable for some time. And then the video moves on to the sad news of Rebecca's passing, the condolences. Then to my surprise, the host, outing himself as one of the beta male wokeists, takes huge offence to programming legend and creator of Doom, John Carmack's post on his past business relations with Rebecca Heineman because he called her, him, and Bill, with the host highlighting the ridiculous concept known as deadnaming. And this is despite John's opening line of first knowing Burger Bill Heineman, which in 1990 was the name at the time, and what John's memories of her were. The absurdity of deadnaming means you have to reject the objective truth of the past and contradict your own experiences. You may have picked up that I have been quite happy to refer to Rebecca as the name she wishes to go by, either if it was informal or legally changed, as well as she and her. What I refuse to do is engage in the Orwellian Ministry of Truth process, where history is erased and denied completely to suit the agenda of today. Who controls the past controls the future. I will refer to her pre-transition past as a male, because she was.
But I was talking to them, I'm willing to learn, and I found out my crime was that I dead-named her. Now, I'd never heard that term, before a day after the Golden Globes, and that was saying her old name, and even acknowledging that she used to be a man. But she did. I saw him at the Olympic Games. It was decathlon, it was in everything. It was all over the place. Shot put and pole vault. He won a medal. He was famous. He was on telly all the time. But, a big, famous man with a huge, I don't know, but I mean, I'm guessing probably he's a big, but I've learned my lesson. Now, I'd never dead name her now. No, I know it's right. I'd never dead name her now. But like years ago, when she was a man, that was years ago, I'm saying.
Remember that despite owning 3DO Doom and seeing Rebecca's name as Bill as a clue, I still had no idea she was a transsexual until told. I admit in hindsight I can see her genetics show through somewhat, especially as she aged, in much the same way as I didn't see Stop Skeleton's host being a beta male liberal wokeist, but really should have looking at him now. But had I only ever knew her, or anyone for that matter, as male, only hearing them transition later, I'm still going to refer to them as I knew them from my perspective, as John Carmack was doing. The woke talk of empathy, which in simple terms is putting yourself in someone else's shoes, simpler still, appreciating something from their perspective to understand a position, view or situation, which seems to be a courtesy they don't practice themselves. How about the courtesy towards others and kindness they speak of? Well, the woke host has to say this of John.
What a prick!
He goes on to further bait and switch to begin a rational admission that he dead-named Elon Musk's X platform as Twitter. Well, yes, it's rational to call it Twitter when referring to it in the past when it was called that. However, that was a trick. It wasn't rationale, but his woke leftism becomes more apparent when he further gives his opinion of
Elon Musk is a prick. And so is John Carmack.
If you embrace the concept of deadnaming, then that copy of 3DO Doom needs to be destroyed. It literally deadnames Rebecca as Bill in the intro slide. Finally, if you want to take issue with John Carmack and resort to aggressive insults, tell him to his face. Just a warning though, despite John being an uber-nerd legend, he's also a proficient martial artist in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and holds a black belt in another, so he'd soon stop that woke skeleton from fighting. Thanks for watching.